Hello, everyone. Greetings to all of our guests all over Ukraine. And hi, everyone. We are glad to greet everybody who is watching us, all the guests who will join us today on our event. My name is Dmytro Levus. Next to me, there is Oleh Lisnyi and Volodymyr Solovian. Now we are also waiting for Mykola Davydiuk. And we are representing today Ukraine. And our guests are today from different countries, from Latvia, from Lithuania, from Germany, and also from that Russia, which not from the Russia itself, but from the Russia which is fighting together with Ukraine, meaning the acting part of Russian opposition. Our event today, our discussion, it is kind of not too formalized, and it is dedicated to the tricks of Russian Federation that are aiming at Russia, again, to be able to become the allies of the West when fighting the international terrorism. How that's happening and in which way this is happening and what has to be done in order for this thing not to happen and not to exist. And that is what we are going to talk about today. Together with Oleh Lisnyi, we've been heading the TV show and the radio. It was how rich and how poor Russian world is. And back then we learned about those tricks of Russia and its sins, because usually in these sins, the victims of Russia are blamed. But now we see that there is a big war going on, and on this background, after the so-called elections of the president of Russian Federation, that actually are none of the elections, because we are radical to think that there is no president in Russian Federation. Putin, there is a dictator who, so to say, has just legalized his position he kind of made it sacred for his population. And after that, there was a mass shooting in Crocus, in the concert hall, in order to legalize himself on blood, so to say, to blame Ukraine and eventually to offer himself to the West as the allies when fighting international terrorism, because this is the thing that everybody's scared of. And based on that, Russia is not just trying to become a partner, but there are also other problems. For example, problems concerning, first of all, the sanction policy, which is not enough. There are some problems concerning that Russia can somehow omit the sanction policy, can overcome that. And there is a range of different fields that are not kind of touched by the sanction policy. It's like the transitioning via different countries that is happening to Russian Federation. And based on all of that background, Russia is a victim of terrorism. Russia, which kind of strengthened itself, will try to make it so that people forget about its crimes and at the same time returns to normal relationship with the world and will try to obtain Ukraine as a trophy. So here's what we have to do. Why should we do that? That is what we are gonna discuss today. And we have our guests. We have the deputy of Latvian Saeimas, Edward Smiltens. I will switch to Russian. Edward Smiltens, he is a person who is speaking and the deputy who is fighting Russian impact. For example, it was him who raised the problem of Russian transitioning, and his actions are really efficient. It goes through different countries that need to fight, and his actions are efficient enough because Russia reacted and is trying to make it so that in order to organize his criminal prosecution. But I would like to give the floor to Edward Smiltens, the deputy of the Latvian Saeimas. Hello, dear friends, Ukrainians. It's a big happiness to see you live. I'd love to continue speaking with you in your wonderful Ukrainian language, but I still need to learn it a bit, so next time I will succeed for sure. So, hello, and yes, actually, I am really proud that Latvia was maybe even the first country that started large-scale support of Ukraine. That was on the 14th of February 2022. We raised the flags, Greek flags, and then all the other things. We started sending you stingers and military equipment, everything that we had at that moment, and we raised a big part of the society that started providing us with money, millions of euros, and like Twitter convoy. That's private persons. Private persons were just giving their cars, and 2,400 vehicles have been provided in these 2 years and have been supplied to your front line for your use. And that is 1% according to our GDP. That is help to Ukraine and military support, that is 370 million euros. We were trying to make a drone coalition of Europe and different other initiatives. But it's very good to help Ukraine. However, there are also different moments regarding how is that for Europe not to help Russia. That is, in February, we amended the law and we have forbidden the import of products, agricultural products. The main goal is not to pay money to Russia, not to give resources. And now we have a big discussion regarding supply. That is, it's a transitioning via our country, via Estonia and other countries. There is a supply of resources that can be used for production of military techniques. So it's like 2 million tons of products have gone in these 2 years. And now in the parliament and media and society, we raised the discussion regarding the fact that we need to work in order to stop the possibility to supply Russia with such resources where is the key? Like, there are such oligarchs as Vexelberg, so they are like such players in the name of Russia. I guess they bought and they owe resources in Southern Africa, for example, and from there, the ships are going to Europe and they are like loading the ore, for example, and that all is going through European countries to Russia. There, they produce metal in their metal plants, and then next they can make some bullets and weapons, etc. I think it's a very important topic as far as we are aiming at, and we are making everything possible, even if it means big losses for the economy, because we do understand what is the price of all of that. We need to make it so that such supplies wouldn't be possible, even. Such an agenda, this is the type of the agenda that we have now in our parliament. Yeah, thank you very much. And the question then, in this sense, well, now there are elections into European Parliament. The elections are going on in Latvia, and it is actually obvious that openly pro-Russian forces or powers under the mottos that they used to have, like they cannot pass with the kind of like mottos that they used to have, because we see certain changes regarding like as if protection of those people whom Latvia forces to pass the test in Latvian language. Yeah, and Edward, such a moment, if there is an opportunity, if it's more convenient for you to speak English, you can speak English. We have the interpretation.
English, French, whatever. Yes, we have European Parliament elections in 8th of June. I can say that strategies of Russia have been changed and capabilities of them maybe are changed since the 24th of February 2022. And it's the similar thing that you had in war, when the war started, the readiness level of Russia and technical capabilities. We saw what happened in the first 3 days that they told that they will take Ukraine in 3 days, and we discovered that even you with limited resources, you were capable of fighting back and pushing back, how they say, almighty Russian army. Not anymore the second army in the world, but the second army in Ukraine, as we like to say it. The same thing is strategies with helpful people who could influence political processes in national level and in European level as well. We have an exact case when a parliament member from Latvia, we discovered that she has been curated by FSB agency, let's say. And these facts are now in public. So, and it was a visible part of it because this person didn't cover any sympathies to Russia and Putin, and she was in Crimea as a European Parliament member of the occupation of Crimea, visiting there, and it's a big shame for Europe. But right now, I think, and that's why I'm fighting also for this mangan ore ban, because it's a money flow for the transit companies as well. It means that the Russian money is staying on, for example, Latvian soil, where those guys who are in transit business they are actually in Latvian politics. It means that they have Russian resources to build up their political strength and build their political environment. So I think this is also a really important note to be mentioned. And right now we are going for European Parliament elections, and most of the parties are putting European question and security question as top priority. And we do all we can to get as much influence there as possible to defend our common interests.
Thank you. Питання були.
There were questions. Do you have any questions to Mr. Edward? If not, then we will return to this topic in the future, but meanwhile, I would like to give the floor to Mr. Volodymyr Solovian as a representative of this one of the best platforms in Ukraine, of Ukrainian Crisis Media Center. And I think that we managed to have certain bridge already, because Mr. Volodymyr will talk about the problems of the global south. And Mr. Smiltens mentioned the manganese ore of Mr. Vekselberg that are coming from global south, actually from South African Republic. And I think that this connection, global connection that exists, it is the topic that we need and we have to raise. Thank you very much for such a wonderful presentation. Of course, there is competition between the Western countries and Russia for the impact in the countries of Global South. And of course, at first, we should make such a remark that the term itself, Global South, is quite not strict. If we look at the informational component, then Russia is acting differently in different regions. And actually, I would, based on the experience of work of the group of analysis, I will separate like China, because this is a country pretty closed in informational sense, their own networks, their own like significant language barrier, and the rest of the countries where Russia is showing up more proactively. And so I would like to separately stop on this aspect of impact of Russia and the global South countries on the example of the recent terrorist and Crocus Hall, and the attempt of Russia to use this is the appeal to the threat of world terrorism, which is really relevant for the most societies. Therefore, we can see how Russia, like in this example as well, they are using their old tactics. Namely, they are trying to use local agenda, local fears and phobias in order to incorporate beneficial narratives, beneficial for them, into local media. And also very often Russia is using the widely spread in local societies like theories of like hidden agreements. And if we analyze the terrorist in Crocus City Hall, here Russia is trying to make a parallel with the terroristic organizations and hypothetical impact of the USA, that they are ruling these organizations. And here it's like the signed equal. And we need to stress on that as one of the most significant threats in perception by the global South countries, how they perceive Ukraine, who is coping with Russian aggression. And here Ukraine should work actively in the informational field. I would like to mention a few words about my personal experience of participation in the Indian TV Republic One. The topic was dedicated to terrorists in Crocus City Hall. And what I should mention is that even local journalists, even local experts, they are trying to show parallels with terroristic activities of Al Qaeda, and in particular, Indian experts. They were comparing the terrorist with the attack of fighters in 2008 in India, Mumbai, the well-known terrorists, and thus local audience provide user of this TV channel, they are introducing the thought that Ukraine is acting similarly to that historical kind of opponent of India's Pakistan. So in wide audience, they are presenting like the thought that Ukraine is, so to say, the proxy power of the USA, of America, and they are kind of making it equal, Ukraine and terroristic organizations. This is what Russia is trying to achieve in their information activity. And special attention, of course, we should pay to India, to African countries, because here, for Ukrainian expert environment, there is bigger space for operating, taking into account the smaller language barrier, more access to local media. So we should stress on the fact that Russia was standing behind many terrorists in Russia itself in order to use those reasons for additional mobilization of the society, including we should pay more attention to activity of Russia in Syria, Syrian theater of military actions, because these very events have launched the fact that in Arabic world they are not accepting the actions of Russia that were of a big threat for the local civilians. So there's quite a wide space for counter argumentation, counter narratives, and of course, here Ukraine should position itself not as the Western country in communicating with the global South countries, but as a country that was a victim of the colonialism of Moscow. And this agenda should show position of the country and representation of Ukraine in general, because more productive, in my opinion, is bringing to the audience, to society of global South, how useful Ukraine might be in the context of bilateral cooperation. And here we don't just have in the context of some trade connections like grain, etc. Of course, it's the basis for many bilateral cooperations in the countries of global South, but also during the Russian invasion, Ukraine has gained quite a big and significant experience, including taking into account our experience of using the drone systems. These positions Ukraine should develop in communication with the global South countries, and here probably we should learn a bit from Russia how to use local agendas, how to better learn that information environment where we plan to have some impact and to demonstrate local societies the manipulations that the Russia has. Ukraine has strong position as a country victim of the aggressor and the country that used to be colony earlier on, and these historical parallels should be communicated more actively so that Russia cannot kind of easily conduct the same historical parallels between Ukraine and local conflicts and local contexts of withstanding the threat of global terrorism. Yeah, thank you very much. And indeed, right now, it's very good that talking about how Russia is trying now to use one of such moments to present themselves as a victim of international terrorism. We should not forget also about the fact that there is this global context as a global south, and now it's becoming relevant also because that maybe soon in June there will be the global summit of peace based on agenda is created actually by Ukrainian formula of peace offered by the president of Ukraine, Mr. Zelensky. And we can already see how Russia is trying to grasp the initiative from there as well. Therefore, we are going to be attentively not only looking at that, but also attentively creating our agenda. As it turned out, Ukraine can do that. And those things that Mr. Solovian has mentioned right here were very good. And I would like to give the floor, as I announced, to the part of Russia, of part of Russian opposition who's trying to fight somehow Mr. Ilya Ponomarev, the only deputy of the State Duma who voted against the election and voted against the recognition of occupation of the Crimea, because there is no inaction, there is occupation because Ukraine did not recognize like any changes. And he is now the coordinator of the part of opposition who is really fighting. Therefore, yeah, indeed, the question, what and how can we do in such a manner so that these like tricks of Putin's regime and tricks of Russian Federation not to be successful? The floor is yours. Hello, colleagues. I'm very glad to see all of you, and thank you for the invitation to speak up. I think that it is better to say, like, not Russian opposition, but like people who are fighting against that. And I think that we should just differentiate between opposition and resistance, because we are resisting that with weapons in our hands, and there are people who are trying to feel themselves more comfortable somewhere in the West. From the point of view of what we can do, I think that we should strengthen this direction. Here we mentioned the Peace Summit in Switzerland. Many times people were saying that, well, how we can talk about peace without the participation of Russia? How can we agree about something? How can we solve something? Well, they are right to some extent, but let us involve this very like new Russian government, which will just put an end to Putin's regime, and let us talk about the strategy of achieving peace, which can be created after Ukrainian victory, and how the territory might look like afterwards. The territory which we know as a Russian Federation, like, is it going to survive, or it will be divided into several countries? That is important to know. It's important that in general, like, we need to understand what kind of rules are there, and this is the joint work of all the Ramstein coalition, the countries who are going to participate in this summit of peace. Now we can see perfectly what is happening. From one side, we see strengthening of this part of the resistance. That is, we see that the scale of operations on the territory of Russian Federation is growing, and it's not just about Kursk and Belgorod oblasts, but also inside of Russia. And We see that different things that are happening there, they cannot just happen without the participation of Russians, because they are helping there at places locally. And the amount of people already involved to this movement inside of Russian Federation is growing every day. But we also can see that this political component, it is not actualized, and Putin is trying to make everything possible to ruin the movement in this direction. We could see, as from the very beginning, after the terroristic act in Crocus City, he started speaking that he sees some signs of Ukraine, not just Ukraine, but those people who left in 2014, former Russians who are organizing these kind of protests. At the first sight, it looks like it is something senseless. However, Putin is trying to implement the scenario which he's used already during the war in Chechnya. And as we all remember, at first the sympathy or the likes of all of the world were on the side of Chechens, and then after some attacks inside of Russia that were shown as attacks of the people from Chechnya, it was the common thought, common understanding, different countries has changed. Putin is trying to make the same against us. And I'm saying against us because I am not differentiating Ukraine from Russian weapon resistance, because we are fighting together. And I think it's very important for the diplomacy. And I think that it's important that our strategy is not a strategy of defense, but a strategy of attack. We should reveal all these tricks that Mr. Putin is making, and we should not let him succeed. Thank you very much. And by the way, yes, in my opinion, that's a very good thought regarding the fact that if indeed the world wants to talk, to communicate with Russia, then there is Russia that can be invited to the Summit of Peace. Why not do so? Indeed, in the world, there is different experience, and in my opinion, in general, it's weird question regarding the participation of aggressor in the Summit of Peace. That is in 1943 in conference in San Francisco. Somehow nobody, where there were the Union of Nations, nobody invited Germany somehow, because it was even not appropriate at the moment to talk about that. And now we can see the position from China, who's trying to implement that in any way. But let us say so that these are the realities of the time, and I am giving the floor to Mr. Mykola Davydiuk, the person who wrote a book, How Putin's Propaganda Works, and later on in the library, somewhere in Volnovakha, it was found, and Simonyan and Skabeyeva, they almost died because of that when they published that in Russian propaganda outlets. So I think that it is logical right now to talk about the topic that was started by Mr. Smiltens, also about why sanctions don't work, what can be done, and in general how to make it so that Russia stops being associated as a normal member of the world community and stops using the world problems and stops pretending to be a victim, no matter what kind of victim they are, a victim of the terrorism, or as they try to pretend, the victim of NATO expansion or victim of Ukrainian aggression. Well, in general, we have to speak about Russian narratives and Russian corruption money and political corruption that is still existing in the West. They live in Western societies, and we can see that the huge number of those who could have stopped these narratives, they are pretty loyal because the money from that goes into their election companies. These are not just farms of some bots, trolls, and other tools of the influence of Kremlin, but also its financing of candidates. We see that in France, Germany, we see that even in Holland, and we can see that Russians are trying to impact elections in the USA. And today we can confidently say that actually Putin, as of today, for the infrastructure of dams and preservation of old technical heritage of infrastructure of the Soviet Union, he is spending less than, for example, intrusion to somebody's elections. And last year, for example, when indeed Ukraine was really strong in counterattack, there were Western media who started writing that, let us just not let Ukraine win because Russia will lose and they are a nuclear country. But nobody says that the Soviet Union lost to wars, and also like USA lost in Vietnam. But again, nobody is using this information because they are trying to show the empire that it is there, but they are not showing the economies that are quickly developing or some important regional players. We don't see there India, South African Republic, Germany, Brazil, and many other countries. That is the first thing. And second thing is that for Putin, it is beneficial to have this terrorism victim role. And now he did nothing to overcome it. And for Putin, it is very important to change the narrative, and he is using that. And we miss the goal into our gates, and we have to be honest here. Like, nobody will believe that Ukraine is guilty because after Crocus terrorists were Russian to Belarus, and they said that they came from Tajikistan. So even theoretically, we were not there. But if we analyze how in the internet via the bots and troll farms and different Kremlin media, how they were presenting that on the global south, indeed we saw a big part of the audience who were full with these lies. So I need to agree indeed that there is big difference between Russian opposition and Russian resistance, because resistance is doing some actions against Kremlin and Putin. But Ms. Latinina, for example, she herself launched the posts and tweets where she was saying that Ukraine's guilty. So it seems pro-Ukrainian lady who in Ukraine had few thousands of thirds, and she is blaming Ukraine. And then Putin is repeating that Patrushev, Bortnik, etc., etc. Yeah, she deleted this tweet. However, again, it's been used for at least a week, and they were bringing that further and further. I will tell you what we have to do in Ukraine. We have to be present. We have to bring our truth to these countries of global south. Yes, we will have problems with the West in the future, in any case, for sure. But now this is very catastrophic thin territory. It's like we should be present in media. We should let our deputies to go and to talk. That is the global south. We need to tell the truth there, because from presence in media, like there is sense in that. And these are political solutions. That is the first. Secondly, we should invite them more often here. So if we analyze and big top guests from the West, from Europe, we almost didn't have those, or like we used to have like few times less than before. And that is also a very important message. Like the Pope of Rome, he wants us to have peace with Russia. He haven't visited us, not a single time, but such a visit is needed, not just as a religious leader, but as a person, he should come and he should see what Russians are doing now in Kharkiv when they are just destroying the city almost for 2 million. What they are doing in Kherson, the wonderful south city, and sometimes they have 40, 50 shellings per day. So let him come and see how Russians are destroying Ukrainian infrastructure. He wants to see Tripila in Kyiv Oblast. If he wants, he can go to Ivano-Frankivsk or Lviv, the city of Stry, and see what is happening there as well. So it's very important for us to continue the story that we've been making earlier, to invite them here. And the third thing, it is clear to fight with their propaganda and fakes, and Ukraine in this direction has seen and knows quite a lot. We have to share this experience. We have to show it, to tell about it, because earlier on it used to be just our problem. But today we can see that Putin is using these stories in the West, and very often that is successful. And the West doesn't always understand how to withstand that with their democratic tools. And the last thing regarding the terrorism, so the intelligence was saying that to Putin that it will be Crocus, when and how, but that was beneficial for Putin. For him, it's totally a change of the paradigm. He is a victim right now. The victim, like, you should feel sympathy to the victim, and they are trying to manipulate with that. We need to play with this message. We need to show what Russians are doing here more, because just in a week, like for a month, we've been talking like how many people were killed in Crocus, but in a week, Russia killed like 10 times more people than those who died in Crocus. But nobody is speaking about that, because very often, and it's a challenge for us and Western politicians, our diplomats, etc., very often we are taken to the level of statistics. Like, okay, 100 people died in Ukraine today. What can we do with that? It's statistics. But in Russia, terrorism, fresh topic, and sorry for everyone, etc., etc. Again, the difference between opposition and resistance. Like, opposition are saying that, like, I haven't seen cues of, like, Russian oppositioners who are saying, oh, we are sympathetic, we are sorry for what happened in Stray or anywhere else. But they are saying, like, well, what can we do? You will suffer. So all those people who are saying this way, come here, let us go together to Kharkiv so that you can see what do these shellings mean and what it costs to our country, because those are Ukrainian families, Ukrainian lives, Ukrainian people, and they are ours. Thank you very much, Mr. Mykola. Indeed, a lot of problems were raised, including some general humanistic perspective, because indeed we are taken or perceived at the level of statistics. And yeah, this is relevant. Nowadays, Russia is destroying the city of Kharkiv, which has more than millions of population, and Kherson, which, like, for a long time they haven't been having the normal life. And based on that, why? Because it turned to statistics, including for Western media. Mariupol, who is forgotten already, almost 100,000 people have died, and 50,000 were brought by the occupants. Both they are citizens and people from Central Asia, and in such a way they become the participants in this crime of genocide, because they are settling there on the bones of those who died. And based on that, again, very interesting position of International Committee of the Red Cross. And indeed, with the centimeters, like, they are measuring the amount of air in the premises where Russian occupants are being held, like the captives. And at the same time, they would like not to notice what is happening with Ukrainian militaries, captives. And I will repeat myself, I've been mentioning that many times, but they say that, well, they didn't let us go in there, but each didn't let us has the name, surname, paternal name, and the military position. So you can get the press conference in Ukraine, like, okay, we tried to get to Ukrainian prisoners into the concentration camp Olenivka, and there is some colonel with such a surname like Pupkin. He just didn't let us go there, and he gave an order to some Kadyrov's person to hit us 1, 2, 3 times, and then they can do nothing. So that is a bit like emotional thing. But I am glad to give the floor to Mr. Sergej Sumlenny, and this is the person who has a unique experience. Why? Because first of all, he's got Russian background. That is, he knows Russia from inside. Secondly, that is the person who knows Ukraine perfectly and has been helping and is helping Ukraine and is speaking Ukrainian and knows what is happening, how it's happening in the West as a citizen of Germany, an active participant of German political and expert life. So I would like to invite to the floor Mr. Sergej Sumlenny. Hello, Mr. Petro. Thank you very much for such warm words. It's incredibly pleasant to hear that, and it's a big honor to join your event. And it is hard to add something to the things mentioned by other participants. I would like to underline just one moment. Like, first of all, Russia indeed is trying to use this situation in Moscow, Crocus City, in order to achieve their political goals. And that's absolutely, like I have mentioned it already, it's not the first time that Russia is doing that, and in Putin's narrative, it is fully included. So those were like destruction of houses in Moscow in 1999, and it was unclear what was happening in there, and those were some internal operations of FSB, and looking at all those proofs that what happened, most probably that was internal operation, but not only. We do remember that with similar shellings, Ukraine was blamed that Ukrainian militaries are shelling Luhansk Oblast, and we've seen that Russia used something else for their internal conflict. So sometimes the commanders of those units, they were blamed that they used certain weapons in order to shell Luhansk, like Lozovay, for example. So he was blamed by his own people. So even for internal rhetorics, it was a kind of secret, and they confessed in that. What is interesting in this situation regarding Crocus City is that Russia is using few narratives at the same time. For the West, they are using the narrative that Russia is a victim of terror, and inside of the country, they are using the narrative that Ukraine is guilty. And inside, actually, this narrative of terror, it's working, and actually, it came to, so to say, good place, because we can see that now in Russia, they have the increased number of attacks on people who have the so-called like more dark hair, more dark skin, some characteristic features, and we see that Russians, they are pretty radical, and they demand to exclude all the non-Russians from Russia. So there we can also see that this narrative of Russian fight against some other threat in this rhetoric, like they are kind of architect of the so-called like Kiev regime. And again, externally, they are almost not using this topic with Ukraine. Why? Because this is causing more sympathy on the West. Like, even though, in spite, like, Russian propaganda is blaming Ukrainians in bombarding of Russian cities, or like recently, kind of like Ukraine bombed some territories, and such a blaming as like one of the parties, and it's dangerous. So Russian doesn't have a presumption or assumption that nobody thinks that they might be lying, but blaming Ukraine in the fact that Ukraine prepared similar terrorist, they're not brave enough to do that yet. So in the West, they are promoting the fact that those were people from like Islamic people, and somehow they figured out that with like they gave flowers and they mentioned their compassion to Russians. And I totally agree with the previous speaker regarding the fact that we haven't seen anything similar after the bombarding of Ukrainian cities, so that the ambassadors, for example, they work in Kiev and they go with flowers to, I don't know, near the house where the Russian rocket hit. The head of the Green Party in Germany, most pro-Ukrainian actually party, um, in one in 24 hours he mentioned his sympathy to Russians, and he said that it's a horrible thing. How could it happen? And I just checked the tweet of Mr. Hudikur, and he's supporting Ukraine. He continues supporting Ukraine. He's a head of Ukrainian and German group, and he is standing on the side of Ukraine. So in his Twitter, there is no single mentioning since 2017, not a single recall of Sumy, etc. So the sympathy to the victims of Crocus City Hall, it's okay. Does it mean that he's standing on the Russian side? No. It says that in his head there are narratives that Russians are higher. And it's very interesting, and Russians do understand that Western politicians, they can imagine that similar terror will happen in Paris, in London, in Berlin, etc., etc. We know that, and our people were dying like that. In Germany, there were such terrorists in London of different nature, with knives, with like different things were happening. Shellings by rockets of European cities. Well, let us say so, if we are not taking into account the Balkans. But the shellings with thousands of victims, none of European countries know what it means. The only thing we can compare it with is Second World War, and those who were like at least like teenagers, they during the World War II, they are gone already. And so Germans can be associated only via rational analysis, understanding that this is horrible. With Russian thing, Germans are associated on the level of emotions. And that's important, and Russia does understand that. Then we see that a number of horrible things in Ukraine, as it was mentioned earlier, absolutely clearly. It is hard for me to be not the first and not the second one, because almost everything has been mentioned already. It is minimized, and it's inflation of horror, so to say, and is just turning into statistics. Even more than that, regular horror causes the feeling that it's necessary to withdraw from that. Like one terrorist in Russia, this is something that requires some reaction from you. But everyday bombarding in Ukraine, like, what can I do? If I think about that all of the time, then it means that I will be sad all the time. I'd rather, like, I won't like to be sad, so I won't think about it. And here, I am coming to an end, but here we can see that the situation of the political elite, now I'm talking about Chancellor Scholz, because Germany, if during the last almost half a year after Germany has made the last radical decision of help, that is giving these 20 Leopards that had to break all the Russian defense, and nothing was given after this. During these 14 months that have passed after Leopards, there was the following idea: situation is too difficult, it's impossible to help, therefore we shouldn't help. And that was the position that Taurus had and other weapons. And the situation was brought to the point that many people, like more and more, they are still on the side of Ukraine, but this rhetoric of Scholz, it leads to the fact that more and more people are looking at that and they are saying, like, this situation is so horrible that it has to be ended somehow. And that's not the compassion to Ukrainians anymore that is working, but it is like fear. Fear that we are working with something we cannot win over. Well, of course, it's a joint economical budget of Europe and NATO, and Europe can win from Russia quite quickly, but this feeling of artificial apathy is winning. And in this situation, of course, such terrorists as in Crocus, they are helping to show that, like, yes, people are suffering. Yeah, we should come back to Russia, but nobody is asking why. Why are Ukrainians so harsh? Why don't they express sympathy, etc.? And actually, it's very hard to fight that. Very hard. But we need to think, like, maybe how we can fight that, or maybe we can discuss that later on in our discussion. Yeah, thank you very much. By the way, I would like to remind one thing over here. I remember before the beginning of the big war, Mr. Sergej came, and somewhere like in a few weeks, we had also a small, I dare say, strategic session with a group of experts. We've been communicating, and back then, there were some assessments from Mr. Sergej, and later on, like for me personally, that helped to perceive how the situation developed with the help from Germany, in which way, and well, some things. Now the situation is indeed much more, let us say so, much more different. Everything is much more complicated, and indeed, it won't be again as it used to be, but this inertia in perceiving Russia, which is big, it was always there, and it's impossible, kind of impossible, to win from Russia, and like any conflict with Russia leads to the fact that everything becomes only worse. This assessment, this inertia, it is impacting a lot of things. However, still, actually, this inertia can be broken as well, and I would like to give the floor to a friend of mine, Oleh Lisnyi. And as I've mentioned already, we've been working with him, including also, we were working in order for this inertia to be broken. So, Mr. Oleh. Thank you very much. By the way, for each next person, it is harder to speak than the first person or the second. It's It's hard, but I will make probably some reflections and I will make some accents to a bit different side. I will begin with the fact that Russia used to be killing, is killing, and will be killing. They are killing others, they are killing their people. And I'm quoting good and bad Russians. However, there was Litvinenko, the special from special services, and their special services killed him. And if I'm not mistaken, the one who killed is now a deputy. That's interesting because the murderer is in the parliament. What other parliament in the world has murderers among themselves? Russia. And Litvinenko, either in the interview or in the book, I cannot recall that, unfortunately, but he said a very cool thing back when he was alive. He said that while the world is running after the Al Qaeda, it slept over the big terroristic organization with more than 100 million participants and who will just drown this world in blood. Maybe he was killed because of that, because Putin was more cool than bin Laden, and he remains now the coolest terrorist. Because look, what things are happening? Not funny. It can't be funny when we are talking about terrorists. However, for example, Russia stopped recognizing Taliban as terroristic organization. I have just one thought, that there should be one, that is Russian Federation, and all the others won't be terrorists. Okay, the world is just eating that. Okay, you say, what is Taliban? A conspirology that maybe you created them or you were helping them at the beginning. However, it's about terrorism. That is what is hurting you. The terror act, where 180 Russians died, it hurts you. So why don't you react to these tracks of Russian Federation like they are cooperating with different terrorists like Hezbollah and etc. They are hugging each other. Is that okay? Well, fine. We move on. Ukraine has really nice proverb. I will try to make it correct because dear great public is with us. So in Ukrainian village, people are saying, no matter what happens, just the daughter-in-law is always guilty. For Russians, always somebody is guilty in something. Well, somehow they just slipped a word. They said like those were mice who bit the dam. Then it turned out that it's Kazakhstan, and then since from the territory of Kazakhstan, they launched drone to Tatarstan, again Kazakhstan, and the terrorist Ukrainians, for sure. What is Russia doing? They are selling chaos and hatred, because again, it was mentioned that they are like talking about Islamism. Let us follow classics, because in one video Putin says like Islam people, in the other one, no, not from Islam. How can we believe him? And then Ukrainians, and then we don't know who, because it might be anybody. So now they are saying that it's Washington that is in this terrorist. Everyone is blamed except for Russian special forces. By the way, Russian special forces and lately are showing the fact that they are not catching mice, or they are catching mice inefficiently. It could be seen when two very cool intelligence worker or whoever, they went to see some sites with their passports where it's like written that what is happening. And then USA said that you are going to have the terrorist. Okay, it's enemy. You shouldn't listen that. Then Iran is saying like that you will have a terrorist. They don't mind, but that's their friend. Yeah, they are enemies for us because they are launching the drones on our territories. But here, like either special forces, they have a dream, I dare say. Like one political power said that I have a dream in Ukraine. So they have a dream of creating the chaos which can be managed, and not a single special force in the world could not manage chaos. They create it and then they are fighting with that, and it is growing into whatever, but not the manageable chaos. So I assume that Russian special forces knew that this will happen. They knew who is to blame. And there's 140, 150, 200, 300 Russians will die. That is a good idea. Whatever. And another option that in any case, it was mentioned to Putin that in any case, we will show it in the way that these are Ukrainians. If not, then we will force the next like few 100,000 people to go and fight with Ukraine because we need to take a revenge. By the way, I don't know how many people went to war, but these dynamics that first it was 50% and it was 70%, they believed that Ukrainians did that. Who else? Because it's only like Biden who is making some bad things. And now these are Ukrainians. We know that. That's perfect. So it's very interesting just to see like how many people did go to mobilize themselves. Did it work for mobilization? Because one thing is to say that Ukrainians are bad, but after you've seen some black bags, not everybody's coming back home as a whole person, right? After war. Very big question is how many people have gone to the front line. If not many, what I'm leading to, then they will need to strengthen the signal and to show it in such a way that those are just Ukrainian footprints, so to say. And then they have to remind the West that Ukraine is a terrorist. You cannot support terrorists. I am saying that like in brackets because the only terroristic organization I started with is Russian Federation that has to be destroyed. And I liked what Mr. Ilya said, that the Russian person is saying at the moment when Ukraine will win, well, there will be many pieces. That is wonderful. But the West, unfortunately, is not having a vision. The world after Russia, it's a strategic vision. And it's not there. Okay, the world without Putin. Just do this. No. Because even here we have hypothetically second war with the Russian Federation. That is, they assume that Russian Federation will stay. That's a big mistake because I like the fact for the Russian Federation to be defragmented, and then we will agree with each of the parts. Maybe we will make friends with some of those, but that is not for sure. Thank you. By the way, it is really important that Mr. Oleh now just mentioned this system of agreements, safety agreements that are being concluded, and indeed almost everywhere, almost from the first agreement, like with Britain, we have this moment about the future war. Indeed, from one side, it seems that it's realistic, but from the other side, yeah, that is the issue of that there is no such vision as what has to happen with Russia, even assumptions that Russia as a force might not be there, even though it is obvious that this might happen and this is the future that might be formed. Now, it became even more right, probably after the words of Lloyd Austin, when he is speaking of that Ukraine should not hit the oil processing plants in Russian Federation. In other words, during the political discussion, he cannot figure out what will happen with the Crimea. Even though there is clear position of the USA, there are principles of sovereignty and territorial wholeness, and we are talking about that. This is what the modern world is holding on to, and I would like just to remind you that Russian dictator, for dozens of years, actually, he's been saying that there are no problems with Ukraine. We have all the agreements, and just an idiot can demand to return the Crimea, etc., something like that. However, this exists. And it's one of the things that we have to mention. So, what I started with, Ukraine managed to change the world agenda somehow. That is, nobody expected that the second army of the world will turn out not to be the second, or that Ukraine will cope. Now, the agenda has changed even more. That is, Ukrainian formula of peace. Still, people are talking about that. Why? Because it is relevant, no matter how weird it sounds, as it turned out for many countries. Because it's not only about setting peace for Ukraine, but it's about principles. How can we return to the principles? Good principles that are written in the Charter of the UN organization, including it's also about some fair things that aggressor has to be punished. That is the moment. That is, in any case, at least on the level of big idea, that is working for us. Therefore, we should and we will promote further this agenda regarding the future of the territories on the east of Ukraine. And today, we should also have the deputy of the Euro Parliament from Lithuania, big friend of Ukraine, and in general, the person who is defining the politics of Europe, Mr. Petras Auštrevičius, but in the Euro Parliament, the agenda has been changed a bit, so we will hope that he will be able to join us. But I think that still we have some things to talk about and some things to mention. So I guess let us return to discussion of the things that we've been mentioning today already, and I would like to ask a question to Mr. Sergej Sumlenny about how, in his opinion, because now there is information that Germany is going to provide one more tranche of help, like 20 military machines, Marder as rockets for Patriot. Or maybe we've gone through this peak, so to say, of help from Germany and emotional positive perception of Ukraine. And there will be no return to that, or the Taurus issue is not just a political joke and will be able to return to life, so to say. And what can be done here? What Ukraine can do here? Because the ambassador, Mr. Melnik, was criticized a lot, but in my opinion, actually, the ambassador Melnik was efficient in emotional sense as well. So, Mr. Sergey, please, what do you think? Can we return to more efficient support and from the side of Germany, and what and how Ukraine should do, remembering about the experience of Mr. Melnik, who is now the ambassador in Brazil? Thank you very much, Mr. Petro. Well, first of all, I would like to mention straight away that I'm often asked this question. Like I am saying that I think that this ambassador is very efficient and it's a very brave person. And he made a really risky choice. He's been risking his career, reputation, and future. Mr. Ambassador Melnik, as a person who is knowledgeable, he saw the situation from the beginning of war, and he saw that if he is gonna use the classical pathways, like he decided to do that informally, like meetings, try to work via international law, and etc. The position of German government was formulated in the discussion with the Ministry of Finance and the leader of the Democratic Party of Germany. They agreed a few hours after the attack of Russia to Ukraine. He said, like, why are you nervous here? In 72 hours, Ukraine won't be there, and you should start living in the new reality. So he was polite and careful. The protests were accepted, and in 6 months, they got the answer that unfortunately we can do nothing. Mr. Melnik, in such a situation, he found the only ally, and it was German society. German society, which was much more progressive than our pro-Russian, absolutely infiltrated Chancellor Scholz and a big part of his government, because those are the career-minded people, and their position in government is more important for them than thousands of Ukrainian lives. And they understand perfectly their political support. They do understand that in Scholz's government there should be Ukrainian, pro-Ukrainian person. They are even offering to fight for Kharkiv and Bucha, but when it's about voting for terrorists, they say no, because this is the position of Chancellor Scholz. As a citizen of Germany, I don't really understand why do I need the Ministry of Foreign Affairs who are saying good things but are doing nothing. Because of Chancellor Scholz. Maybe we can just substitute our Minister for Foreign Affairs, because somehow Mr. Scholz is going to manage the government if our Minister of the government, which is not belonging to Chancellor Scholz, if they cannot stand up and say that we don't want to have such a chancellor who is tolerating genocide in Europe the third year already, why do I need such a coalition? That is regarding Mr. Melnik, because he started the discussion, he put some pressure on Mr. Scholz, he found the support of German society, found the support, big support in German society. So it's like the fact that we said like we want to have weapons to fight with Russians, that's something incredible. It's total fight. So as a result, the country got both protection and tanks and many things. Without the Ambassador Melnik, nothing would have happened. Next is about the position of the government, like terrorists. If that will happen, it will be a miracle. And I will just open a bottle of champagne, but personal for me, it's like if Vladimir Putin goes in front of the camera and says like he wanted to show what kind of peace will lead to, but it's like we need to solve that in places, and then there should be like respect to sovereignty of the countries that are attacked, etc. That is unreal, because first of all, in Europe, in June we have elections. As a matter of fact, for Germany, it will be repetition of elections to Bundestag at the end of 2025 in September. In addition to it, this year we have regional elections in a few Eastern German regions, because we are a federation, and each federation is choosing own parliament, and they are not synchronized. So this year, Eastern lands. It means that we are fully diving into the situation when all the parties are just thinking of how to maximize their benefits. So the governmental body for all of Scholz. The government has no support at all. Chancellor Scholz, like these once German chancellor after the year of 1949, not often he had such support. Scholz's party has 16%. In these eastern regions, less than 10%. That is absolute minority. So some parties, they have like 30%, and if we take into account other democratic forces, like they have 60% in general. Like 60% of people in certain region are ready to vote for the party, and they are supporting Putin's war against Ukrainians. The Germany is nice because the population of these territories is not big. If you look at their role in this policy, then this region is working with that region, etc., etc. But if we look at the elections, then it's not a big amount of population, but still it is impacting the mood. And what the main challenge is about right now for Chancellor Scholz and his party to get out of this 16% and go first to Euro Parliament, okay, to understand all these election processes, and then to come for the next federal elections that in turn are chosen by Chancellor. And we can see that he chose strategy for himself. We read that from the speeches of his environment. He has chose the strategy that we are a party of peace, social democrats. When all the parties are asking for and demanding weapons that will just increase the number of deaths, pain, and bad things, we are for peace. And we consider reduction of the conflict to be peace. Of course, that's the conflict in Ukraine. They see that the situation will be brought to the point where like we cannot move anywhere, and that it will be like someone who will freeze the contact. Of course, we will not recognize occupation of these territories by Russia. Those will be sovereign territories of Ukraine. However, we are gonna do nothing for Ukrainians to return their territories. And thus, as far as for Putin the red lines will be crossed, we will prevent the nuclear threat, and we will go to there's as a party who could omit the nuclear war at the time when all the other parties were throwing the world closer to nuclear catastrophe. And we can read that clearly from his speeches, etc., etc. So all the parties that the only way out to change the chancellor according to the law of Germany is the so-called constructive for a new year. That is 50% of the parliament are voting for the new chancellor. They cannot just remove the chancellor and say that there will be some new elections. No, they are not announced at all. Only if the chancellor asks to express mistrust to him, or he's asking like, do you trust me or not? Of course, Scholz won't ask about that. So no new elections, and they need to offer some new councillors, new councillor person. So these are either like Christian Democrats or Social Democrats. Social Democrats like won't join removing the Scholz. And for green ones, liberals, they need to be combined with a third party. So Christian Democrats and conservators, they will demand their person to become the chancellor. Otherwise, why do they need it? They would rather wait till 2025 when Scholz will have 16%, and their person will be elected without all these toys. So, and the Green and Liberals are saying, like, who do you want to see? Christian Democrats, they are saying, we want to see our leader, Friedrich Merz. It's a very conservative person, and Greens just hate this person, and they hate him even more than Putin, because Putin is a leader of foreign enemy country, and Friedrich Merz is going to be their head, and he is like for his anti-egalitarian, against migration. He is really misogynic in his past, and etc., etc. So the Greens don't want to see him as a counselor. So thus we know that, yeah, this position is working. Like, we are waiting, Ukrainians are dying, and we won't give like towers, and at the end, eventually that will end somehow, because Ukrainians will see that after the like another rebuilding of Kiev, we cannot do it like that anymore. But when he will be asked, like, how did he let the genocide of Ukrainians happen, he said, I didn't. I was giving patriots to Ukraine. They were protecting human lives. That is, I'm totally clean. I was helping Ukraine. And at the same time, they understand that 12 batteries of Patriot, Europe 100, and Ukraine had like 3, if I'm not mistaken. That's the whole mathematics of calculations of Chancellor Scholz, because his aim is to get the Chancellor's position, and his allies are also like kind of friends of Ukraine, and they would just want to stay in the government. Yes, thank you very much. Well, of course, not the apocalypse, but quite a hard situation, as we can see. Does anybody have questions to Mr. Sergej? If not, then one question. So we have a bit different format right now. Then we are moving to... There are questions to Mr. Smiltens as the ex-speaker, and taking into account the problem that had been raised. Yeah.
Include issue of Russian transit through Latvia and Estonia in the EU sanctions, or maybe it's we have logic in deciding this to decide in local level. What do you think?
Yes, it's important to limit Russia with sufficient necessary resources for production, anything useful to make war with Ukraine. And therefore, my preference is to make decisions in national level. We try to do that in Latvian parliament, and we haven't got sufficient votes. The second version is to make agreement between Baltic states and Poland. And last year, while I was a speaker, we created a 3+1 format. It means Baltic states and Poland to resolve such issues as this one. And the third option is to make agreement between European Union countries to ban this transit for these kinds of goods. So right now the government chose scenario number 3, so they will try to convince our partners in Europe to make decisions in context of sanctions and in the format of prime ministers, leaders of the country. So this is the decision of the current government, but we are trying to do the best to make also national ban on these transits.
Thank you very much. І тоді
Then I would like to give I have a question to Mr. Davydiuk. This is the question that we have regarding the sanctions. We've been discussing that, we've been saying that in the context that is there right now, it becomes clear that maybe some sanctions, some EU sanctions, and not only EU, especially here after today's claims regarding the oil processing plants, it seems that they consciously are made in order to not to do extra harm to Russia. Can we do something in here, and how should we act in this context? How Ukraine should act in this context, or like where we can cause some pressure, or what should we do? I think that two aspects regarding the Russia and omitting sanctions. I think that deputies of local parliaments should more go to the EU, to Euro Council, Euro Commission, in order to pay attention to that, because the big bodies, like those who are managing the European Union, like the 10th package, 11th package, we can see that, but we see a lot of details. So based on analysts and their researches, communication with different trade associations, we can see that a big number of Caucasus countries, they help Russia to overcome sanctions, and some of those countries, they procured iPhones more than the people that they have, but they are not using iPhones if we analyze that. And the percentage is 10-15%. All the others went to Moscow. And again, iPhones, that is one thing. And the other story are some cheap goods with chips, because the chips later on might be used also for drones. For rockets, it's a harder story. However, for some simple basic drones, that can be used. So on the level of parliament, we also have some parliamentary tools. So we would like to invite our parliamentaries in Europe to pay attention to that. That is the first thing. Second is about the oil objects. Well, actually, there's no unity in the USA, and I've been watching in the morning yesterday's news about the USA. So Austin is saying that we need to stop hits on the oil processing. Deputies in Congress are saying that the right of Ukraine is to hit, because what is oil and gas? That is where they are getting money for rockets and drones. This is military resource. And of course, when Ukraine is hitting and reprocessing, then Ukraine is trying not to give money, because if Ukrainians are bombing because like Russia is getting money from that, it's bad. But when Russia is hitting today, Tripila hit station was exploded. Nobody's saying nothing to Russia. Nobody said anything to Russia, because in Stray they destroyed objects. Nobody says nothing to Russia. Well, that is Russia. Russia won't hear. What should we say, etc., etc. And that's the problem, because we are stopped. And Russia, well, that is clear. Why should we repeat ourselves? That's Russia. Well, wait, you've got the sanction tools for that are not working, or are working really bad, and that's a problem. So I think that for us, Austin said before that, speakers were speaking about that, like Pentagon and the White House, somewhere we need to listen to that, because still, if the third time they will say that sometimes we might get no necessary resources, but again, we've got some objects that we know it's production of drones, it's production of rockets, and we should target those places. Well, actually, we took like almost every fifth Russian plant, and that's wonderful. And I don't see that the prices in the world from the reprocessed naphtha that can be considered gas, the prices change in the world? No. The prices are more changed from the news from the Near East, from Hamas and Israel. So informationally, the prices are more dependent on that than the oil processing inside of Russia, because if we take the amount of Russian oil, then the main part is taken to China and India. China is consuming, India is reselling, but it's raw oil, so nobody wants to pay some additional cost in Russia. So this is not impacting. However, somehow they are trying to give us a clue that later on they might have some internal political problems. I mean, Western partners. Therefore, it seems to me, it's my subjective opinion, that we should have heard that. However, again, this is the issue to our military analysts and special forces. What goal do they see and what they are doing? So I don't think really that it's a story of public commenting. However, the fact that Ukraine showed that they have own technique, own drones made here and now that are flying more than 1,000 kilometers, that's great. And yesterday there was an article in Wall Street Journal that not all Western producers of drones, they were so happy about their financial prospects. They brought their drones to Ukraine, and the drones are worse than Ukrainian drones. So yeah, we have the prospect to launch the whole sector which can promote and the victory of Ukraine and weakening our enemy. And the main thing is that it might be our component that will be interesting in the West. What can we bring to the West that is not there yet? Because the samples of the weapon that we are producing, remnants of the USSR weapons, they are weak or they are already known, but we can say that here we are ready to share. We developed that, and we are not expecting for like just thank you from you or payment in euros or dollars, but we want to have our part in that. In NATO, for example, we want to be part of the European Union, because just selling for the market, again, the buyers might be different, and we want to be part of this big Western family. And we are bringing our intellectual input in there. And this is the part that we can be proud of. But these plans, let us consider them not more than an advertisement of Ukrainian weapons, because everybody was so worried what will happen to the world oil. Nothing. It has been sold and it will be sold, but we see that there are powerful Ukrainian drones that in 1,000 kilometers, they are ready to hit the goal. So this is the best advertisement, but pay attention to Ukraine as a producer. That is very important, because all the wars have started with the old weapons and end up with the new ones. So Ukraine started inventing some interesting new things, not from a good life, but not due to the good life we have the production of drones. We don't have artillery, so Ukrainians say okay, we will develop drones and we will head by them. You don't give us rockets to hit Russian territory, we will use drones. But through this, we came to certain results. Yeah, these results are not the best ones and they haven't changed the war yet, but if the West will get involved with their money, indeed, it might bring certain changes to Ukraine. And Russia has just to wait a bit, and their ships and their plans will be ruined. Yeah, by the way, about the fact that war starts with one weapon and ends up with a different one, that's totally correct, because the classical example is Russians like to speak about the tank T-34 of 1941 and 1945. Those are two different tanks. That is one moment. And the second one is regarding the oil. Yes, now it's such a time that I just remember, and I think Mr. Oleh also remembers, and Mr. Edward, Soviet times in the book about nature. I remember it was written that we have oil for 25 years and coal for 50 years. And since then, 40 years have passed already, and neither oil nor coal are not coming to an end. Moreover, other prognoses at the beginning of the 2000s, since 2010, there will be just electric cars and so on. But we are using also the cars that are using gas. Still, we are getting a bit distracted because, yeah, we do understand that the situation is difficult. These things that have started as like Ukrainian drones, right? They turned into real thing in the situation. And in general, so to say, that is the topic that was raised by Mr. Mykola, and it was really good because today we are talking not just about how Russia is trying to pretend to be a victim and how they are using their weight that they've been keeping for dozens of years and all these like big Russian culture, Dostoevsky, and all the similar situation with the perception, their perception, and they are causing pressure with that. But we are discussing that Ukraine should not and will not be perceived only as victim. Yeah, indeed. This is how it is. We can make such things. We've changed a lot of things. And moreover, we are and we can be a thing for stability and safety, including in Europe. By the way, there are certain developments in this sense. Strategy of development of the defense complex of the EU. And as for the EU sample back 2022, it was nonsense. Just to imagine the strategy of development of the defense complex, European Union. That's nonsense. It couldn't have happened, and now Ukraine is present there as a component. And in my opinion, it is really illustrative and very important. However, I have a question to Mr. Volodymyr Solovian regarding, like, if we are here today talking about the global south, then still, how do you think Ukraine has got strategy for development of policy in the African continent, and we have strategy. I cannot recall, it was adopted, I guess, in Latin America. Also, in your opinion, is there some real dynamics in this sense? Yeah, we can recall there were two tourneys of the Minister of Foreign Affairs in Africa. One was interrupted in 2022 in autumn. However, still, maybe there are some moments that Ukraine should use, where Ukraine should use not just the official channel, so to say, not just the official diplomacy, but diplomacy of the second scale or expert diplomacy or something else. Yeah, for sure. All the tools should be involved of cultural diplomacy, and if we just sharpen our attention on information field, then we should clearly recognize that we are having information war because the West is not conducting information war in the paradigm of war. That is, still they are trying to stick to some standards, journalist standards, and opposition, etc. And Russia is using that. So the West, as a matter of fact, is providing the opportunity to Russia to conduct this propaganda, to press into the information space, like Western information space as well. I'm not talking about Global South already. Like their narratives, and I can give the names of numerous interviews of Russian politologists and people in high positions. So why to work on this masochism? I don't know. It's a bit big question, but it should give us a clear signal that the West is not ready informationally to get involved and act proactively regarding the information risks that Russia is generating, including against the West itself. I'm not even talking about Ukraine now. So in the context of work with the global South, it's important to recognize that unfortunately West is not helping us with that. And the recent example of President Macron in Brazil is also saying that certain correction of their position of countries, neither Latin American or Asian countries, are not happening. Or India, we can also bring that as an example. That is the visits of European leaders. That's more about business, more about development of markets, more about stopping China. However, the informational field and informational, like stopping Russia, usually is beyond the context. And the main thing here is that the West and Europe, first of all, they are scared of causing some pressure because there are certain fears. And if we analyze the Brazil case, then maybe Bolsonaro can return to power, or his political party, which is the ally for the Republican part of the USA. And of course, that is scaring European liberals. And also, if we analyze the example of India, then here we have the context of positioning the China, and the West is interpreting India as the place for economic integration with the countries of more global regions, ASEAN, and showing that as a so India is perceived as a forepost of Western technologies, and this is also impacting the readiness of the West to communicate and to promote, even to help Ukraine promote some informational narratives into the media space of the countries of global south. So I think we should not live with illusions, and we should clearly understand that in the information war, we are one-to-one with Russia. And if we are talking about the information space of global south, then actually that's not as hopeless as it might seem, because we are comparing like financial resources that are sent to information field by Ukraine and Russia. But it's important to act just like in the battlefield with asymmetric measures, and this method can be applied also in information field. However, unfortunately, currently we don't even have this platform from which we can start building some policy regarding the regions of the global south. Namely, we don't have synergy between the request from the state, like good analytics from the side of scientific institutions. And it seems that we have enough of scientists who are studying regions, they are writing dissertations. However, this kind of thing is not preparing any like agenda or something else that we can use for explaining Ukraine, for Ukrainian narratives to the countries of global south. So currently we have to formulate these horizontal connections between the state institutions and scientific and expert environment, which is communicating with media of global south. And it is important to participate more actively in the ethers. And it's more like this kind of format, text format, is not that popular anymore, but in social networks also it might be a very powerful tool, and we should learn local peculiarities here, what kind of networks are more popular nowadays to be present there. So that is, these are not just traditional Facebook, Twitter, etc., but we should study in more details this infrastructure of social networks of global south. And of course, there is advocacy visits of Ukrainian experts that is working with the local expert environment, and also invitation of journalists, invitation of experts. Of course, there are some safety issues. However, actually the state has enough resources in order to ensure safety, and we just need to reduce the level of maybe in a way some bureaucratic obstacles. However, we should aim more efforts on working with this environment and local media, because the request is just underestimated, and unfortunately, the thing is about how to disseminate the resources in the proper manner. And this requires probably even certain revision and correction from the point of work of embassies and the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and other institutions. Thank you very much. So we are quickly coming to the end of our event. Somehow it was really quick. And, well, I think that maybe we still have some time for Mr. Petras Auštrevičius, if he will succeed in joining us. In any case, today we touched upon, we have considered the whole range of problems, and it seems, what did it start with? Like the country that is committing genocide, country terrorist, Russian Federation is trying to again pretend that they are good, and that's the reason. However, this is bringing a whole range of problems, like a whole number of questions regarding how should we react to this? And some things, like, for example, they are probably not really obvious, and somehow, like the fact that what was mentioned by Mr. Edward Smiltens, deputy of Saeimas, and the former speaker of Latvian Saeima, that is the problem of transit that is aligned with sanctions. However, it is not well known, so to say, that as we are raising this topic, we are talking about that when we are talking about how Russia is trying to overcome sanctions via the countries that do not belong to European Union, via Asian countries or Caucasus. However, here is something where we should and we have to work in the framework of the European Union and in the framework of Ukraine. Again, it's an issue of perception of Ukraine. That is what Mr. Sergej was mentioning. That is how that inertia that is in there, and this specifics of political process for Germany, other countries, specifics of the USA, we have been discussing that quite a lot, and that is obvious. And here, I'd like to give the floor to Mr. Oleh here, because as the person who's been studying what is the Russian world, maybe he will give some kind of reflection how he just has very interesting images, like how to perceive the Russian world. I remember that, so to say, to draw a conclusion a bit. Yeah, thank you very much, Dmytro. You cannot talk about Russia without images. We've been proving that for 6 years. Do you remember we were saying that in 10 shows we will figure out what is Russian world, but we haven't, and we still need some time to do that. And our foreign colleagues should do that. And I agree with Mr. Volodymyr that we should go there where maybe they're not expected us to come, but if Russia is there, we should be there. So if Dmytro wants to have some images, as in a song of Odessa, like you want to hear a song, I've got some. So for myself, I have the image of Russia as a maniac. You know, when we are drawn as a victim, I'm against that. We are not a victim. But Russian Federation is a maniac. That's a fact. And I would encourage our foreign partners to mercy. because each maniac has an urge to be stopped. And in order for him to be stopped, he is causing bigger and bigger crimes. That is, he is saying, like, here I am, take me, stop me. So just listen to him, stop him. Because every day the crimes are happening, and they won't stop till we stop them. If you perceive this state as terroristic organization, as a maniac, whatever, it will be easier to cope with them. Until you think that it's the place where Pushkin, Lermontov, and Dostoevsky were born and it's Russian ballet, etc., you won't succeed in doing that. And it was mentioned nicely today. I would like to give some reflection regarding the fact that Germans or Europe, for them it is very easy to understand what is the terroristic act, but the rocket shellings, no. There is 140 people and 100,000. If we put together like the amount of grieving, like for one person it's something incredible. Is the whole universe is disappearing when one person is disappearing, and 100,000 is just colossal thing. So that's the issue of time. By the way, if I'm not mistaken, Zelensky in one of his speeches said that, are you confident that Russia won't hurt with their rockets any other country in the world? Because they can't do it. And when I hear, if we are talking about Germany, so when I hear this cool word escalation, I can't understand. Escalation already? Or we need to do something else? Is that already escalation or not yet? And Scholz is speaking about that, and Putin is working with that greatly. Just notice how in the discourse of Russian speaking has the word escalation appeared. Before that, they were scaring with nuclear weapons, etc. And now they are saying there will be bigger escalation. You're afraid of it? You will have it. Maybe I'm not a military expert. Maybe I cannot interpret these terms in the proper manner. However, Ukrainian case has shown that it's not mandatory to have the reason in order to have escalation. That's obvious. Putin doesn't always need, mostly he doesn't need any reasons in order to attack. Our logics and the phrase that is driving me crazy from our foreign colleagues, they are saying illogical, not beneficial. Was it logical? Was it good to attack Ukraine? The full-scale invasion? No. Therefore, I think that the world should become more adult. If they think about ratings, about the prices for oil, about not irritating Putin, then this world will just die. Because till the civilized world is living through the electoral cycles, the anger is formed. They're becoming stronger, and they are seeing everything that is happening in the USA as weakness. And if we are talking images, then it seems that the adults of the United States, they went into the room and they are solving their internal problems and nobody is looking out of the window. Then in the window, there is an image that the US can stop being a super state, super country. And it's very hard to lose the status of a super country, but to return that in a peaceful way without huge tragedies is almost impossible. So to be honest, I think that now Russia has the window of opportunities because the world is in electoral cycles. These moral thoughts, should we do that, should not we do that, and the world sees no vision, I've been mentioning. The world after Russia. Still in their world, they see the state which is going to exist as a factor, and that is really wrong opinion, I guess. Okay, and on these words, I think that we will end our today's meeting, our today's discussion and exchange of thoughts. Yes, today we had some interesting things if we are talking that is about, well, possibly We can invite someone from Russia, if people want so, to Global Summit of Peace. That is Russian resistance, not opposition, if somebody wants to see Russia that much. It's about the fact that indeed the world has to form the vision as it can and will live without Russia. That is also about that there are certain things, both as a transit that has to be stopped, because those are kind of the gaps that Russian Federation is having and is using, and also that the maniac can pretty well pretend to be a victim. That is what Russia is doing right now after this mass shooting in Krakow City Hall. And we should not just present this to them. So we would like to thank Ukrainian Crisis Media Center. They are one of the best platforms, in my opinion, in Ukraine, which gives us such an opportunity to speak. I'm thanking everybody who participated today in our discussion. I thank you, real friends of Ukraine, those who joined, and thanks to all of those who are with me on the same stage. All the best to all of you. Have a safe and good day. We will win. Glory to Ukraine. Glory to heroes.